Good morning. My name is James Christian Blockwood, Executive Vice President at the nonpartisan nonprofit Partnership for Public Service. On behalf of myself and our President and CEO, Max Steyer, let me welcome everyone to this event. I'm excited for what is sure to be an interesting and informative discussion about what it takes to transition to governing in a new presidential administration. I want to start by thanking our panelists, who will be more formally introduced shortly, but Ken Duberstein, Chris Liu, Janet Napolitano, and Sean O'Keefe, who I would like to acknowledge as one of our board members at the Partnership for Public Service. And of course, our moderator today, Ann Compton. I would also like to thank the University of Virginia's Miller Center and the many individuals and organizations whose support makes our work possible, including our partner, Boston Consulting Group. Finally, I want to thank the team at the Center for Presidential Transition, especially Carter Hirschhorn and Emma Jones, who helped organize today's event, and all of you I'd like to thank as well who have taken time to join us. The Center is focused on presidential transition issues since 2008, as the beginning of an administration or second term is the best opportunity to set the foundation for a strong, effective government. We launched our efforts in support of the most recent transition in November 2019, 1 year ahead of the presidential election, and supported transition, administration, and career agency officials in their planning efforts. The Center's efforts help with planning and execution of the first virtual transition during what was a very challenging time. You can learn more about the Center's work during the transition in our recently released retrospective report. But as the title of this event suggests, the presidential transition isn't over. As leaders continue to fill their seats and policy priorities continue to be rolled out, the transition continues. Our panelists today each have firsthand experience in the transition to governing and unique insight into the challenges and opportunities that face the current administration in the months ahead. To give some context to the 100 days mark, I'll turn it over to Bill Antholis, who is an expert on presidential scholarship and has decades of government, nonprofit, and academic experience. He is the director and CEO of the University of Virginia's Miller Center, and we've collaborated with the Miller Center on presidential transition issues since 2016. We're thankful for their partnership on this event as well. Mr. Antholis, over to you.
Well, thank you, James Christian, for the really kind words and for the partnership, as you said, which goes back at least two transitions, this one that we've just been through, and the 2016-2017 transition. The first 100 days represent a crucial milestone for any administration. Of course, it's just a milestone. As President Lyndon Johnson once said, you've got 1 year. From his perspective, he had 1 year before Congress stopped thinking about the president's agenda and started thinking about their own reelection in the upcoming midterms. Indeed, as James Christian mentioned, we built a project about this around this idea 5 years ago, focusing on how presidents work to set the tone for their upcoming 4 years in their choices about personnel, process, priorities, politics, and managing the president's relations with the American people. So we've been delighted to partner with the Partnership for Public Service and their Center for Presidential Transitions to manage not just in their extraordinary work to not just manage the last two transitions, but to understand and study the transition itself. On our own team, I want to thank Stephanie Georgiakis Abbott, who not only coordinated today's event, is the co-editor of a volume that we published on transitions called The Crucible. So we could not ask for better partners. Today, we are joined by 4 former senior administration officials, a dream team, if you will. If you could have a bipartisan administration, you would want all of these folks on your team: Ken Duberstein, Chris Liu, Janet Napolitano, and Sean O'Keefe. Today's conversation will be moderated by Ann Compton. Ann served as a correspondent for ABC News and became the first full-time female White House correspondent of a network television news organization in 1974. She's highly respected, not just for her 41 years of covering the White House, spanning 7 administrations, but for her broader commentary and involvement on TV news coverage of a series of presidential events and activities. She's also a key member of the Miller Center's Governing Council. She joined just after I started as the director, and she could not be a better partner. So, Ann, thank you. We can't all thank you enough. Ken Duberstein, if Ann is my current boss, Ken is a former boss. He's the chairman and CEO of the Duberstein Group, advising leading corporations and trade associations. Under President Reagan, Ken was a key member of the administration, serving not just as White House Chief of Staff, but before that as Deputy Chief of Staff, as well as the head of legislative affairs. As I mentioned, Ken was my boss, not in the Reagan administration, but I had the pleasure of working with Ken during my years at Brookings, where he served on the board for many years, while also serving on corporate boards. I'm sure for all of those boards, they had the same view we had at Brookings. He was the E.F. Hutton of our board. When Ken Duberstein spoke, people listened. Chris Liu has served in all three branches of the federal government. He was the executive director of the Obama-Biden Transition Project and served for 5 years as White House Cabinet Secretary, and then after that as Deputy Secretary of Labor. He's also worked in Congress and in the judicial branch, and we're delighted to have Chris as a Miller Center Senior Fellow. Janet Napolitano served as Secretary of Homeland Security from 2009 to 2013 under President Obama. She was before that a two-term governor of Arizona, and after that, after serving the Obama administration, was the 20th president of the University of California, where she still works. She's now a professor of public policy at the Berkeley campus, and she is helping launch a new center on governance and public policy. We were thrilled to get to work with her, thanks to the Partnership on Public Service in the last transition. So it's really great to see you again, Secretary Napolitano. And finally, Sean O'Keefe is a professor at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University and a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He served as administrator of NASA, deputy director of the OMB, secretary of the Navy, and comptroller and CFO of the Department of Defense. It's fair to say he's seen more parts of the federal government than most of us have learned and then forgotten. So Sean, thank you for joining us today. And I want to encourage you, the audience, to join us by Zoom by sending in questions and answers through the Q&A function on the screen. Before turning it over to Ann Compton, I also do want to thank the George and Judy Marcus Democracy Praxis Fund for its generous support for today's event. So without further ado, Ann, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, James Christian, and thank you, panelists. All of you are so experienced in exactly what we're talking about, the fact that transitions are absolutely vital. I'm going to ask each of you a quick question about your experience in this. Chris Liu, when in 2008, when there was no incumbent running, then Senator Obama wanted to start his potential transition, and he did it in a secret. Can you tell us about your secret stealth job back in 2008?
Thank you, Ann. I'm going to date myself a little bit. Senator Obama and I both shared a common favorite political movie, the 1972 movie, The Candidate, which stars Robert Redford as an idealistic environmentalist running for the US Senate. And in the final climactic scene, he wins and he is about to go on stage and declare victory. And in the final line, he says to one of his staffers, now what do I do? We started planning early because we never wanted to be standing in Hyde Park in Chicago declaring victory and not knowing what we were going to do next. 2008, 2009 was going to be the first post 9/11 transition. And so we knew that in addition to simply continuity of government and carrying out your policy objective, you needed to be concerned about Homeland Security objectives. So this was not something that could wait until after Election Day to start planning, which is why we started those conversations about 6 months before Election Day 2008.
And you went out and rented an office, a secret office, and were told, don't tell anybody?
Yeah, we actually used one of our, the office that had been used by our DC fundraisers. It was above the Subway sub shop on Mass Avenue near the US Senate. You got the smell of the fresh bread baking at Subway all day long. And that's where we started off. And again, it's light years from that to what we have to deal with now. When you think in particular about, we were using our own personal computers, we were using Gmail. You would not do that now in an era of cybersecurity.
Well, exactly where I want to go with this with Sean O'Keefe. When you went into government through the Pentagon and you were the, did they really call you the Grim Reaper because of all the things you wanted to cut at the Pentagon? You have seen since 1988 when you entered government, or 89, how, when you entered senior positions, how much the transition process itself has been radically changed. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, matter of fact, I had worked on Capitol Hill for the Senate Appropriations Committee as the staff director of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee for several years prior to the first appointment. So I had some familiarity with the whole confirmation process and how the procedures would work, but I had no idea that it would take as long as it did. I mean, it is a long condition. It seems really long to the appointee and the nominee in these cases, because the longer it takes, the whole process of going through the FBI background checks and everything else that's involved, and the ethics approval process, it really extends that. After 4 occasions of being appointed, every one of them got exponentially harder and longer, just by virtue of the amount of effort and energy taken in order to look at everybody's background and the conflicts of interest and so forth to get there. It takes a while. So in the best of conditions, a transition is going to take at least 6 months, if not a year.
Janet Napolitano, you went from in 2008, you were the Arizona border governor, and on January 20th of 2009, you were confirmed as the border boss, secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, a new agency at a time when there was still great risk being felt in this country. Can you talk about that transition for you in 2008 and 2009?
Well, my transition was lightning speed. I was designated as the potential nominee for DHS in December of 2008. We did all the paperwork, etc. In the succeeding weeks. I was still serving as governor of Arizona. And then when it came time for the inauguration, I was actually confirmed on the day that Barack Obama was sworn in. And I remember so distinctly, I was with a number of other cabinet colleagues or potential cabinet colleagues, and we were in a grandstand watching the parade. And every now and then, I think it was a Marine would come down and tap one of us on the shoulder and say, you know, you've been confirmed. But we had a very good transition from the Bush administration. And I had known my predecessor, Michael Chertoff, in a previous life when we both served as U.S. attorneys. And we had actually worked out between the two of us that even if I were confirmed on election day, I would not take the oath of office until the next day in case there were some sort of event on election, on inauguration day, excuse me. And in point of fact, there was a threat stream on inauguration day aimed at the inaugural. It turned out not to be a major threat, but it had to be worked through. And so that informal arrangement that Chertoff and I had came into play.
That's a terrific story. Ken Duberstein, I save you for last because I've covered you in Washington longer than, well, it's been at least 35 years. And you were a longtime senior staffer in the Reagan White House, but you were then Deputy Chief of Staff and Chief of Staff in those final months of the Reagan administration. Of course, he wasn't running again, even though some people thought he should have a third term. His vice president was running. So here you are handing off to George Herbert Walker Bush. Piece of cake, right?
No. It did go seamlessly, but it took an awful lot of effort. You know, everybody thinks that hostile takeovers between one party and the other are the more difficult. And I would suggest that equally, if not more difficult, is a friendly takeover. Everybody assumes that they're going to stay on from one administration to the next as far as political appointees. And having to say to people, no, you're not wanted, is something that is very difficult for a new president. What we worked out was that for all of the Reagan appointees, if they submitted their resignation letter before January 20th, I would guarantee that the president would in fact give them a letter of acceptance and a personal signature as an inducement to hand in your resignation to clean the slate for incoming President-elect Bush. That worked like a charm. And it was Reagan who took it upon himself so that Bush didn't have to fire people.
That's great. That's
that
great.
Reagan said, I'll take care of that. And we did.
That's it. We're here today to talk about the big picture. The fact is that 100 days is a cliche. It is not a number that's based in any kind of reality. And we want to establish that point of view early in our conversation here. But actually, transitions, according to the scholarship done by both the centers hosting us today, are that transitions can last throughout the entire first year. And that's why our meeting today is called It Isn't Over. I want to start with Chris Liu on something. Chris, you dealt with all of the planning. You were executive director, I think, of the 2008 Obama transition. But I dearly remember that it was the morning after he was elected, when we were in Chicago, the morning after the victory party, that he got his first briefing on the severity of the economy falling off the fiscal cliff. Did you find that you had done enough planning? Did all that planning help at a moment of crisis like that? And is there a comparison at all now with what the Biden administration has found with not only the pandemic, but the national shutdown that has brought as well? Chris?
You know, the most important thing in transition planning is not only just to be prepared, but to be nimble. Before Election Day, we had really focused on about a dozen different work streams, everything from, education, immigration, healthcare. But obviously, as the severity of the financial crisis became more clear throughout the fall of 2008, all of those work streams got put to the side. And the most important thing you had to focus on was the economy. I remember the first jobs report we got when we were in the White House. So this would have been February of 2009. We lost 800,000 jobs in 1 month. Now, obviously, compared to what we've seen over the past year, that was not a lot. But 800,000 is more than the number of people in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you had a sense just at that point of staring into the abyss and not having a sense about how bad this would be. Just to give you a sense of perspective, the unemployment rate at Barack Obama's 100-day mark was 8.7%, and it was on its way up. It actually hit its peak at 10% about 6 months later, and it would stay elevated for the entire first term. So it's one of the reasons why very early on, really after Election Day in 2008, President-elect Obama tried to tampen down expectations for the first 100 days. And he really said this should not be the first 100 days, it should be the first 1,000 days. And I'm sure the other panelists can also opine, no one loves to be judged by this 100-day mark. It's a media creation, and it's hard, especially since we knew how deep the hole we were in. But I think it does, and I know we're going to pivot to the Biden administration. It does show how well they've done both in managing expectations, but also delivering. Very early on, they said, we're going to focus on COVID, both in terms of vaccinations and in terms of economic relief. And in being laser focused on that, they really have effectively delivered on those promises.
I want to circle back to both Janet Napolitano and Ken Duberstein on something, because here we are in 2021. Transitions take good political will on both sides, the departing president, administration, and the incoming team. I want to ask both of you, starting with Governor Napolitano, is in our democratic system, the safeguards of our democratic system, is the peaceful transfer of power guaranteed? Can Americans be confident in that?
Well, I think as we saw on January 6th, no. A good transition requires a partnership from the outgoing administration with the incoming administration. When that doesn't happen, all kinds of chaos can result, and we saw that unfortunately in this past transition. But I want to echo something that Chris said, which is that, and that you've said, Ann, that the 100 days is an artificial metric. And one of the things that it does is it gives the media a point, something to use, but you lose sight of how long transitions really are. And as Sean said, just the process of getting not your cabinet in, which takes a while, but the important sub-cabinet, those deputy secretaries, assistant secretaries, agency directors that are so important to allow a president to carry out his agenda. So, I almost wish the 100-day mark would go away. It won't, but I wish it would.
I'll talk to the media about that. Ken Duberstein, same question. Peaceful transfer of power, is it at risk?
I think it's been at risk this past year. I was involved both in the incoming Reagan transition with Jimmy Carter, as well as Reagan to Bush. The hallmark of it was teamwork. We're both in this together. That was absolutely critical in the Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, as well as the Reagan to George Herbert Walker Bush. What we saw this past several months, starting before January 6th, on election day, it was, I don't accept the results, don't cooperate, don't let them get started because I won, I didn't lose. That made it very, very difficult as far as a peaceful transition. People of goodwill putting the country first. It didn't happen. It wasn't guaranteed. And yet, one of the lessons that we all take from that is that we must focus not just on the personnel, but on the whole transition effort, the combination of working together.
It's what really sets the American system apart.
Precisely.
Sean O'Keefe, did you want to? Yeah.
Yes, it did. I just want to echo Ken's commentary. I mean, the transition from Reagan to Bush 41 was during my initial movement into the administration. And we sometimes forget about that period of time. That was about as testy as we've seen in some circumstances here. At the Defense Department, Dick Cheney was confirmed as the Secretary of Defense in March because the first nominee had failed. And so as a consequence, that process got dragged out. I was confirmed in May. the Berlin Wall fell in November. So the acceleration of activities that occurred and the collapse of the world order at the moment that had existed for the better part of 50 years all transitioned in that span of time. And I'd say maybe half of the nominees of the Bush 41 administration were in position and confirmed by that stage, even with the goodwill Ken's talking about. So events can conspire to really turn this on a dime. On the outgoing process, when the Bush 41 administration turned over to President-elect Clinton, the process there was very much a matter of just goodwill. George H.W. Bush made it patently clear to everybody this was going to be a cooperative endeavor. We were going to make it a seamless process going out. And so as Secretary of the Navy by that time, talking to my successor and those who would be coming in was something that was fully anticipated to occur as soon after Election Day as possible. So it really does become a case of a willingness on the part of the incoming and outgoing administrations to make this work right. This past year, there was none of that.
Right.
So to echo Ken's point, this was just completely an aberration from that standpoint, certainly in the modern era.
Right.
I want to take a detour, bring up a question I was going to save for later because it's one of my favorite aspects of transitions. There are about, according to the Center for Presidential Transitions, about 4,000 jobs that open up for the new president to decide. About 1,200 of them need Senate confirmation. Sean O'Keefe, how many times have you faced Senate confirmation, and did you set any land speed records?
Yeah, all four times.
How many?
All four occasions that I was nominated for presidential appointments required confirmation. And every one of them took just a little longer, but it still nonetheless was one where even in the worst of circumstances, it took all of about 8 weeks to get through the process. And it seemed like forever. But for most colleagues, it took months. And it would, in some cases, be well into the administration before we'd see a nominee that had been confirmed 2 seasons early or nominated 2 seasons earlier, even come forward for confirmation. So it's just a drawn out process. It has taken a much longer period in every Senate committee to consider all of the issues involved in every nominee's background and extract commitments from every nominee on what they're going to do if confirmed. And that whole process has taken on an art form that now just takes a hell of a lot longer.
The Center for Presidential Transition has a chart that shows at least, Chris Liu, let me ask you about this, for comparing recent presidents. President Biden, as of this week, has submitted the nominations to the Senate. 124 nominees, 34 have been confirmed. Is that it's certainly not a record in either case, but is that acceptable, or does it show us that the system, the process itself, just doesn't work well?
Yeah, I think the process needs to be fixed. I mean, let's just stipulate you would never run any private sector organization, any university, as Janet knows well, and on one day the entire senior leadership walks out the door, and then you start to trickle people back in. The challenge is not only, as Janet said, not having your assistant secretaries in place, but by the time you finally do, they start cycling back out again. So the amount of time when you actually have a full team is relatively small. And I think, it does speak to the importance of the career civil service because, large parts of the government are run by acting career officials for extended periods of time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you think about trying to carry out your policy agenda, steering the federal government is a little bit like steering, a big ocean liner. It's going to follow one path unless you've got a lot of hands on the wheel trying to turn it. And you're just not going to have that for long periods of time. And the process has just gotten stretched out more and more. And it's hard to imagine it getting better in a 50-50 Senate. And what would normally be voice votes on nominations aren't even happening. I mean, I'll give you the example of, Lisa Monaco the other day confirmed as Deputy Attorney General on a 98-2 vote. In the olden days, that would have just been voice voted, but that required a cloture vote, then the waiting period, and then a final vote. So, essentially 2 days of the US Senate were wasted on that. And then if you're going to have to keep slogging through this nominee after nominee, I mean, that's what the US Senate's going to be doing for the next year.
Ken Duberstein, it's political. It's a political process.
Absolutely. And the system is broken. You can't go through this confirmation process quickly anymore. There's no such thing as an easy ratification. And I would add to what everybody else has said, remember FBI checks, et cetera, some of which are necessary. It just extends the process that much longer. But the Senate confirmation process needs to be revised, needs somehow to be jury-rigged so that things move more quickly, people are in place, and the government can function.
Let me ask you, maybe starting with you, Janet Napolitano, about the cabinet choices. Obviously, the key to getting a cabinet with any speed is picking people who are widely acceptable to the Senate and to public opinion.
How do you define widely?
Please go, yes.
Well, how do you define widely in a 50-50 Senate?
That good question. Let's look at the transition going into the Biden administration. His choice for cabinet is considered very diverse, but of course we notice there's no Republican, and that picking someone from the other party has been a hallmark of many modern presidencies. Janet Napolitano, do you think that what's your advice on picking that either a team that's diverse, a team that's political, or a team of rivals?
Well, I think it's a bit of a chess game. You've got a lot of pieces to move on the board. You have different objectives. First of all, you need competency and credibility. Your cabinet secretaries are going to be leading huge agencies and will be responsible for implementing your agenda as for the president. You need diversity by ethnicity, gender, I think geography is something to take into consideration. You need some idea that the person is confirmable, that they're not going to run into a wall of resistance. And in the modern era, and by modern I say this most recent transition, that means also going back and looking at what the nominee has done on social media and what they've tweeted and all the rest. As we've seen, that has become a problem, ironically, for Biden nominees, irregardless of what happened during the Trump administration.
I want to remind our audience that we are going to, in just a couple of minutes, start taking questions from you. There's the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that and put in your question, we have aides, able our staff and friends who are monitoring that and are kicking those questions over to me. I wanted to go back to talking about the one other thing, talking about strong cabinets. The idea that a nominee, a choice, has a particular expertise outside of government, is that important? I'm thinking of scientists and others who were brought into government for things such as the Department of Energy, not just having someone who was political. Anyone have a thought?
Yeah, so for example, Obama's first Secretary of Energy was Steve Chu, who's a Nobel Prize winner. Of course, the Department of Energy is not about oil and gas. It's about the nation's nuclear stewardship of the nation's nuclear stockpile and cutting edge weapons research, but also massive computer capacity. Having a scientist in a role like that can make sense.
Yeah, we are getting some good questions. I think I'm going to go ahead and go ahead, Ken. Yes.
And there's one other part to this. Increasingly, you see the first appointments in any administration are the White House appointments. The White House Chief of Staff, the major national security advisor, the domestic policy person. And so we've become much more of a White House centric government.
Mm-hmm.
As important as the cabinet is, you always got to remember the people, proximity to the president really makes the difference. And that's something you have to consider in this as well.
Yeah,
And traditionally, those positions closest to the president are not confirmed by the Senate.
Correct.
Okay, let me turn to some questions because we've got a lot of good ones from the audience. This comes from Laura Hune, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. What do you think is the largest accomplishment of this administration's first 100 days? Anything you thought that would be accomplished and was not? Chris Liu, is that something you could?
Yeah, I mean, I will go back, which is vaccinations. I mean, and again, this is a classic example of putting smart, competent people into government. It's just the basic blocking and tackling of getting the vaccine production ramped up, getting it distributed. Obviously, the challenge right now is redistributing it to parts where there's the demand in places. But when President Biden announced early on that we were going to have 100 million vaccine doses by 100 days, that was a fairly audacious goal. And to their credit, when it was very clear that was too low, they then upped it to 200 million. And so right now you're at a point where 50% of Americans have at least one dose. And so again, we take for granted, and it's easy sometimes, I think, to criticize government when it doesn't work. We don't give it enough credit when it does work. And I just think that the blocking and tackling and getting that done is a huge, huge accomplishment. And then everything else flows from that. I mean, it allows the economy to reopen, people to resume their lives, people to go back to school. The challenge, I think, going forward, and you've seen in the stories over the last couple of days, is that there's a hardcore group of people around the country who may not get vaccinated. And it does raise issues about whether you can achieve herd immunity. And then how do you reach out to these different communities in messages and through messengers that will be persuasive to them?
Janet Napolitano, what about the border? That has been a distinct problem for this administration.
Well, the border is, it's a tough set of issues. It involves Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health, and HHS, and it involves DOJ. And you've got to have the structures and capacity in place so that you can effectuate what your border policy is going to be. So, the Trump administration, they were not taking anybody into the asylum process on the border. So people were backlogged by the thousands, remaining mostly in Mexico. The early decision was they were going to allow unaccompanied minors to be in the country, apply for asylum. When you do that, you have to be able to shelter them. And then you need to be able to find, either vetted family members or foster parents, a safe place where they can go and await their asylum proceedings. And setting up that structure and all the rest takes time. So it looks chaotic at the beginning, but I think they have a plan, and they'll be able to get control over that aspect of the border, and then they're going to have to see what they want to do moving forward.
The message from the White House and as they were laying out the policy wasn't always clear, though, was it, Ken?
No, not at all. I think it was a lot of mixed messages, but I want to go back and accentuate the positive. I think the Biden administration is off to a very solid, positive start. I think what they've done on COVID-19, the vaccination, and the single-minded focus on that has been a real strength and a real positive for President Biden. I think you're now getting into governing even more when you're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about the border, and that is the jury is still out. That's why the 100 days doesn't work anymore.
Right.
It's 200 days or 300 days or Lyndon Johnson, with the whole year.
Yeah.
But I think that their communication on the border has been scattershot, and they need to clean that up.
Sean O'Keefe, we're getting a couple of questions based on what you had said earlier. This one, I'll read one from Jacqueline. What recommendations do you have for reforming the Senate confirmations process in the light of the delay of getting the ascertainment letter during the last transition? Would you recommend any specific changes in that part of the process? And any of you are welcome to kick in after Sean answers.
I think first step would be to every committee of jurisdiction that has responsibility for considering the nomination of any president's nomination going forward ought to have a fixed time frame.
Right.
But you want to make it 60 days, whatever. Even that's pretty, extensive to get through all the deliberations. Because by that stage, as Ken said, the FBI background investigation is done. The Office of Government Ethics has already passed judgment. You've been through the entire gauntlet to get that far to the Senate committee. But usually what occurs after that period of time is it's just lots of horse trading going on over things that have got sometimes nothing to do with the nominee. It's all about leveraging policy decisions or whatever else, because it's your best shot of saying, we're going to hold so-and-so hostage here until such time as you pass judgment on this issue I've got. And as a consequence, the time I spent on the White House staff in the George W. Bush 43 period prior to going over to NASA was spent just adjudicating that kind of stuff, just to get people through the knot to get to that stage. So that would be a blow for freedom all by itself, is to put a finite period of time for which a Senate committee can consider the nomination, and if they fail to do so, discharge them and send it immediately to the floor.
Is this the kind of thing that the Center for Presidential Transitions and the Miller Center, which did a first-year whole project under Bill Antholis's guidance when he arrived, where some outside voices that are non-political could be of help?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
They've just done a masterful job at this. And this would be a great opportunity to pursue some of that. And I believe that the partnership is doing just that.
Chris?
And if I could add, I think actually the partnership did do some work on this, or some outside groups did work on this during the Obama administration. They identified a bucket of nominees that really didn't need to go through the nomination process. I think a perfect example is the assistant secretaries for legislative affairs, which I don't really think need to be Senate confirmed, but the senators balked at this because they wanted those people in front of them so they could make those nominees express a commitment that they would be responsive to the needs of U.S. senators. One small change was that chief financial officers at agencies, again, have to go through confirmation, but they could be sort of fast tracked to the floor, but then they would still sit on the floor and not move. And so the sum total of that effort is maybe a couple hundred positions were taken out of confirmation, but there really wasn't as much progress as there should have been.
Yeah, and Ken, this also needs a president who's going to deal with the majority and minority leaders, or in the case,
Right.
the president has to exert some leadership with the members of Congress.
Well, not only the president, but the White House staff first, and then ultimately the president. But I agree, there needs to be a time limit. Number two, too many people need to be confirmed. We got to reduce that level. The key is making the system work. And right now, it's all impediments. It's not making the system work. It seems to me that you got to just focus on it and get it going again. And I think the Miller Center and the partnership can really play a major role in doing that because they're nonpartisan.
Here's a question about somebody else who has an idea of somebody who could help. A question from David: what can the HR professionals in the various departments and agencies do to aid the transition? Sean or Chris?
That was hard. I mean, by and large, the agency HR offices are really looking at the career force.
Right.
And as a consequence, what we're referring to here are all the folks that are in the capacities where they basically serve at the pleasure of the president for the time being, which means any minute now, that could alter. Whereas in the career force side, that works well. I think, but it could be some supplementary capacity on the part of the HR community in working through some of the requirements that not only the committees may have, but also the internal vetting process may require. But by and large, no, this is something that really has to be taken on within the administration, at the White House, by Office of Presidential Personnel, and by the Senate committees in particular, to really improve their efficiency of consideration, and for the Senate to have stronger rules on how objections can be raised, where holes can be put on nominations. All that's going to work out well. But again, as Chris said, there's a number of different initiatives that the partnership has worked on over the course of the last decade that I think will all be resurrected. And I'm certainly an advocate of looking at anything that's going to move that process forward. And I'm sure the Biden administration is of the same mind.
Before we run out of time, I want to make sure we cast our gaze forward a little bit about not only the mileposts, but the potholes that are ahead for the Biden administration. A week from now, he will be delivering his address to a joint session of Congress. And as a reporter, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it looks just like a State of the Union address. And the impact will be the same, although every president I covered, of the 7 I covered, only Gerald Ford didn't give one. They go in and they do speak to the issues that are important. What kind of what should Americans look for from that speech next week? What kind of high points and what bars must it clear? Who'd like to start on that? Ken?
I would suggest that he talk not only about his ambitions for the country, but how he's going to get there. Setting a tone of bipartisanship, maybe not in the halls of Congress, but with the American people. Maybe a jumping off place for President Biden that would resonate not just with the media, but with the American people. Mm-hmm. I would not go through a laundry list of 100 things. I would focus on 3 things, whatever they may be. Because one of the things that we learned was that the American people are very good if you focus on 3 things or 4 things and not 40 things.
And all the competition to get every agency wants something.
Right, exactly right. And so managing that is a process in itself. But I would think that President Biden laying out his bipartisan agenda, his reasons for reaching out, will resonate with the American people more so than it may be in the halls of Congress.
Anyone else before we have to wind up here on what you would be looking for from the address next week? Janet?
Well, I just want to say that one difference for this upcoming speech versus States of the Union addresses is that there are going to only be 200 members of Congress allowed in the hall because of COVID. And I'm enjoying watching the members all scramble to get one of those 200 seats in the halls of in the hall. But I agree with Ken. A really good address to Congress. Three major ideas. How he wants to accomplish them. I think will have a much stronger impact than a typical laundry list type speech.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, and I was going to say, if I had to identify the three, I'd probably say the first one is COVID again, indicating that we're not at the finish line yet, and there's still more work that needs to be done. I think you'll see him make a forceful pitch for infrastructure, which I think is consistent with his broader theme about Build Back Better. But I think overall the tone, I think he will pivot back to the comments he made a couple of days ago after the Derek Chauvin trial. And I think he'll really sort of talk about this moment in our country's history about how we really need to address some of these systemic racism issues that have been lingering for far too long.
Sean O'Keefe?
Yeah, I just echo comments here that President Biden ran on the basic theme. He intended to be the president for all Americans, independent of party affiliation, race, gender, regardless. And I think he has upheld that. He's certainly pursued that tone going forward. And this is a marvelous opportunity for him to reiterate that and demonstrate how he intends to follow through. And that bipartisan tone, I think, is going to take a lot more work, but at the same time, it's still there. That olive branch is still one that he puts forward that really does resonate with the American people.
We have time, I'm told, for one more question, and I want to turn to something that is near to the heart of the presidential transition group, as well as the Miller Center. Next week begins Public Service Recognition Week. Now, it's not a federal holiday. They'll still pick up my trash in the District of Columbia that week. It's not a day off, but it is a week on. The Center for Presidential Transitions calls the civilian workforce, the more than 2 million men and women who run the federal government. They call them the backbone. I've always called it the muscle of the federal government. It is where the real work continues to be done. What would this administration ought to do on behalf of those civil servants? And to me, more importantly, what should Americans do? Voters, local leaders, academics, because these are not only the federal workers, but there are people who serve in public service at every level of government, state, local, county. Any of you have ideas on what the country should do on behalf of those more than 2 million federal and, of course, hundreds of thousands of others for states and localities who really are the engine of the government that we treasure?
And as somebody who began his career as a career civil servant before becoming political and rising at the White House, et cetera, I would first off say thank you. This is not just the backbone, but it is the muscle. It's the people who are the experts who keep things going, making the trains run on time, being there with their expertise. Saying thank you, I think, would make a big difference in their lives because they have been on the firing line and they've taken too much incoming over the last several years.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, President George W. Bush made it a point every year during Public Service Recognition Week, and at least one other occasion during the course of the year. So at least twice a year, he would assemble all of the senior folks in the career force as well as in the appointed ranks to meet at Constitution Hall. So he would reiterate a singular message, which is public service is a noble profession, regardless of whether you're pursuing it for a career, a season, a year, a term, whatever it is. We all work for the same folks, the American citizens. And so as a consequence, we need to take that aboard. And that message was repetitive. And just like his dad used to do the same thing, it was a reminder constantly of who we work for as public servants and why it is American citizens really rely on competence of public servants going forward. I hope President Biden reiterates that as well. This is a new day.
Chris Liu.
You know, we've spent a lot of time talking about the dysfunction of presidential transitions, the slowdown of nominations. But I think what we have seen over the last couple of months, I think it's a testament to the federal civil service. We have done transfers of power for 200 years through war and depression. And the fact that we pull this off every 4 or 8 years, it's not only just a testament to the concept of people working on transfer of power, but to the civil service, the 2 million federal employees who are ensuring that our national security and homeland security is protected, that our laws are enforced, all the functions of government continued, even while the leadership above them is transferring over. So if there needs to be a better affirmation of why they matter, I can't think of it.
The gentlewoman from Arizona gets the last word. Janet Napolitano.
Well, what I would say is how great it would be if the media took up Public Service Week and took a moment to acknowledge the career civil servants, maybe highlighting a few in local communities, not only in DC, but who work in offices throughout the country.
Wonderful, wonderful point. To each of you, thank you for your wisdom and your stories and your perspective on the idea of transitions not ending at 100 days. Each of you also, thank you for your public service. To our hosts, thank you for presenting this program today. And thank you for allowing me to be here, to be something of a ringmaster on a subject that I covered over the arc of 40 years for ABC News in Washington. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the panel. And everybody go out there and be safe and say thank you to your public servants.
There you go. Thanks.
Thank you.